Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. And I'll be presenting a variety of things going on across the state of Alaska. If you'd like additional weather information and details, you can go to weather.gov/Alaska if you have the ability to get online. And if you have any questions or interesting reports, photos you want to share with me, you can reach me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, here are the headlines, and they have not changed from yesterday because we're continuing to watch a lingering area of low pressure in the Gulf that is going to continue into the day on Thursday in the process of weakening, but still bringing some additional rain, especially to the Panhandle. But a more powerful 970 millibar low over the Bering Sea is dropping southeastward right now, and that has widespread storm force winds associated with it. It is going to split into a couple of pieces. One of those pieces is going to slide across the southwest portion of the state and emerge between Kodiak Island and south of the Kenai. And that is going to spin up an area of low pressure as we go through Thursday, while the main, very potent little piece of energy dives southeastward across the eastern Aleutians. And that's that piece of energy that's going to pivot out over the North Pacific and then turn back northeast to northerly Friday into Saturday, and that's going to spin up a second stronger low that could bottom out below 960 millibars, perhaps as low as around 955 millibars Friday into Saturday. And this will be a higher end wind, marine impacts, even certainly aviation. Rainfall amounts along the northern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle could be on the order of 2 to 4 inches over a couple of days, maybe locally higher in a few spots. That could lead to some minor flooding along some of the creeks and smaller rivers. Certainly expect them to get to bankful. We're not expecting any major flooding at this time, but it will be a significant wind and at least a decent rain event. So taking a look at what we have for watches, there are high wind watches in effect for Friday afternoon through Saturday morning for portions of the Panhandle, including Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan, and Craig, where these winds associated with this deep low could gust on the order of 60 to 70 miles an hour. So this will be a storm force low that has a lot of impacts there across the Gulf, and it'll be all the way, depending on the exact track. So some of the computer models want to take the low northward and be located somewhere west of Yakutat as we get through the mid-weekend. So we'll keep an eye on that as we head through the next few days. Precipitation amounts, we can see on Thursday, the most significant rainfall will be across the southeast part of the state. Yakutat down into portions of the Panhandle could see locally over an inch of rain, but more importantly, as you look to your right for Friday, much of the area across the Panhandle there could be picking up on the order of 2 to 4 inches of rain. That would be into early Saturday morning. So as that low develops, it will likely lift up through at least the eastern half of the Gulf and kind of pull back toward the north, maybe even northwest a bit if it really deepens. And we're at that time of year now when we're starting to see the more powerful storm systems in response to the change of season. We get the colder air building to the north, and then we also have very strong jet stream winds aloft that allow these lows to spin up over the relatively warmer, unstable air there over the Bering Sea or the Gulf. And looking at satellite imagery this afternoon, you can see a couple of areas of cloud cover with a counterclockwise spin, one there south of Haida and another one that's kind of pivoted on up through the Panhandle and pulling back up toward the north central Gulf. If you look off to the west, you see a lot of bright white cloud tops there out over the northern and southeastern Bering, and that one spin that you see there off the Russian coast and extending down toward the central Bering north of St. Paul. That is that 970 millibar low as it continues to deepen and crank up. That is heading off toward the southeast rather quickly, and we'll be approaching the eastern Aleutians by the time we get into tomorrow morning. So looking at the map right now for this Wednesday afternoon, we have kind of a double barrel split low out over the Gulf. That secondary low that's lifting up from south of Haida, that's the one that's going to bring some additional rain and a little bit of wind there for the panhandle, but back to the northwest there in the north central bearing, that is the main player. And as we go through tonight into early Thursday morning, we are seeing that low going to split. One piece of energy is going to ride along and just north of the southwest coast and the beginnings there of the Alaska Peninsula, while that other end lagging back towards St. Matthew drops toward the southeast and cuts across the eastern Aleutians as we head into Thursday tomorrow afternoon. And the other low will kind of reemerge and take shape between Kodiak Island and south of the Kenai Peninsula. And that will also have some wind and rains with it. But the big weather story will be what happens on Friday. And we'll see a low down there kind of between the North Pacific and the South Central Gulf interface really start to deepen and lift northward. And it'll have a very strong frontal system and very strong winds around it. Storm force winds that'll be lifting north and northeastward, especially first to impact the panhandle. And that's why that high wind watch is in effect for a good chunk there of the panhandle Friday afternoon into Saturday morning, where winds could gust as high as 60 to 70 miles an hour with rainfalls of 2 to 4 inches. And even back toward the west, rainfall amounts of 1 to maybe as much as 3 inches will be possible, especially from around Seward, Whittier, Prince William Sound eastward through Cordova and Yakutat. On the backside of the system, it's also going to draw down some colder air. There will likely be snow in the coastal mountains, and just generally a colder northerly flow will set up over the west side of the state with that powerful low sitting out over the Gulf Friday into Saturday. So here are the temperature forecasts. Thursday morning lows will generally be above 40 across much of the panhandle, but back toward the interior, we still have had a weak ridging of high pressure, brought some sun this Wednesday afternoon, but with any clear to partly cloudy skies where there's still some clearing, temperatures will get down well below freezing, some areas into the teens. Otherwise, coastal areas where it starts to cloud up toward Kodiak and King Salmon, that temperatures will stay above freezing in the 30s. And then Thursday afternoon, look for highs upper 40s to lower 50s in the panhandle, generally in the 40s elsewhere across much of South Central. And then Friday morning, we'll see lows generally middle 40s there across the panhandle with those stronger winds and rain moving in. And then we will see temperatures back up toward the south central interior, still getting down below freezing, whereas coastal areas will manage to stay above freezing with the cloud cover in place. And temperatures Friday afternoon will generally be around 50 for highs in the panhandle and generally confined to lower to mid 40s for much of south central areas, both interior and toward the coast. The Arctic coast for Thursday morning will be below freezing. Normally cold spots along the Brooks Range and in the east central interior could dip into the single digits. Otherwise, 20s very common. And high temperatures Thursday afternoon below freezing, especially along and north of the Brooks Range. Areas along the Yukon River, upper 30s to near 40 degrees. And then low temperatures again, quite chilly. Single digits there along, especially the south slopes, the spine and south slopes of the Brooks Range. And then general readings across much of the region in the 20s with a few pockets of teens in the normal cold spots. And then as we go to Friday afternoon, look for high temperatures, generally near or below freezing north of the Yukon River, a bit above freezing in the Seward Peninsula, and then south of the Yukon River readings will still manage mid-30s to maybe near 40 at Fairbanks. And then finally, looking at the southwest, Thursday morning lows will be well below freezing along and west of the Alaska Range into the upper Kuskokwim, middle Yukon valleys. Generally above freezing along the southwest coast, out along the Alaska Peninsula with readings around 40 or so extending out into the Aleutians. And then as we look at Thursday afternoon's highs, generally upper 30s, near 40 across much of the southwest interior, mid-upper 40s down along the Alaska Peninsula and even near 50 in a few spots. And then Friday morning lows will generally be below freezing across the southwest interior. And as we get down again toward the Aleutians, lows generally in the lower 40s. And then finally, looking at Friday afternoon, we're looking in the west. There'll be a chilly northeasterly flow with temperatures only in the 30s for highs. And as we go down the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, temperatures will generally stay in the 40s for the day. And as we take a look at the extended temperature forecast for October 5th through the 9th, I want to point out that temperatures are expected to average below normal across the southeast and panhandle, near normal across much of south central Cook Inlet, north up to the Arctic coast, but a bit above normal potentially over the southwest on up into Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula. This would not translate to a fabulous warming trend, because what I'm going to show you next shows what we anticipate for the overall pattern. It's going to be a stormier pattern, and when we get the southwest moist flow of air aloft, that usually spells storms coming in and precipitation coming in from off the Bering. And there's a very good likelihood that from October 5th through the night, it's going to be a wet slash mixed rain snowy period there across much of the western half of the state, centered on areas just east of Norton Sound up through getting toward the lower middle Yukon Valley. And then precipitation is expected to average a bit below normal along the Alcan border, and more so down toward the southern end of the Panhandle. So we certainly have active weather continuing here as we head into the month of October.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
In your flying weather, we are watching a potent area of low pressure. It's kind of broken into two parts out over the Bering. The triple point low is going to work its way across the southwest coast interior in through just north of Kodiak Island and south of the Kenai by early Friday, whereas a potent secondary system drops southeastward from around St. Matthew down to the eastern Aleutians, and then that's going to reemerge into the northern Pacific and spin up a strong low pressure late Friday night, early Saturday morning, right along that south central Gulf North Pacific interface, and that low is going to lift northward up toward the central Gulf Coast. So Thursday morning, look for IFR conditions along the Arctic coast and northwest, areas across the Gulf back through Kodiak Island and the interior of the southwest. And then going into Thursday afternoon, we'll see IFR expand across the Panhandle as a frontal wave works its way inland, and IFR conditions set in there through parts of the Kenai back toward the southwest, and look for IFR continuing along the Arctic coast. And then Friday morning, east of the low center, there could even be a rumble of thunder there up in the north central areas south of Cordova. And then as we look across the Panhandle, IFR conditions anticipated, as well as pockets there, Tanana River, as well as back up along the Arctic coast. And then on Friday afternoon, look for IFR across the inner waterway, intercoastal mountains, back up through the Alaska Range toward Fairbanks, and then on up along the Brooks Range and North Slope. Past conditions for Thursday, Anaktuvuk will be MVFR becoming VFR, with VFR conditions most prevalent south entrance south. Same thing for Adigan, MVFR becoming VFR, with VFR conditions most prominent flying from the south entrance southward. Generally, Lake Clark and Merrill should hold on to MVFR conditions on Thursday. Look for Rainy Pass to generally remain VFR. Windy Pass could see kind of a toss there between MVFR and VFR, but generally MVFR. And then further east, Isabel also looking at MVFR conditions as southerly flow begins to develop there ahead of that low. And then Metasta should see VFR conditions throughout the day on Thursday. And Tanita, VFR becoming MVFR as that moisture begins to lift northward from low pressure that'll be emerging there between Kodiak and the Kenai. Portage should also see MVFR conditions on Thursday, deteriorating to IFR by Thursday evening and Thursday night. And then on Thursday, Chilkoot and White will start out with the VFR conditions becoming IFR as that remnant frontal band work its way into the Panhandle. Freezing levels are generally to the surface all the way down to the beginnings of the Alaska Peninsula and south of the Kenai into the northern half of the Panhandle. And we see freezing levels aloft upwards to 6,000 feet central southern Panhandle, and not until you get south of the Aleutians. So generally some pretty cold air in place over the much of the mainland. And best chance for icing between 7,000 and 14,000 feet on Thursday there across portions of the Panhandle. Between 8,000 and 16,000 feet, especially south of Kodiak Island out over the North Pacific, and 6,000 to 14,000 feet along the Alaska Peninsula, trailing back to 4,000 to 8,000 feet once you get near and west of St. Paul and St. George. And here is the upper level winds, a general broad low pressure circulation there at 30,000 feet with a very powerful jet core of 170 knots there south of the Alaska Peninsula, with northwesterly winds there again upwards to 175 knots. That's helping to spin up the strong area of low pressure at the mid-levels. We see a few different areas of low pressure generally centered on the southwest part of the state. Ahead of it, winds of 70 to 80 knots out over the Gulf back toward the North Pacific. And then as we drop down to 3,000 feet, we see primary low circulation there between the Kenai and Kodiak Island, with winds extending back upwards of 45 to 55 knots across portions of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. This will translate to a pretty good chance of isolated severe turbulence there across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians between the surface and 3,000 feet. Also surface to 5,000 feet around Kodiak, the Kenai, and then back up across the northwest, surface to 3,000 foot turbulence is likely there. The Seward Peninsula, tip of the Northwest, and St. Lawrence.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation, because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human. So the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time. So the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is The Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and I spoke with the Sea Ice Edge today as we begin our marine weather segment. And if you recall, a few days ago I mentioned that we reached minimum ice on September 16th. Well, the Ice Desk now reports the first inklings of some ice beginning to form along the shoreline in some of the more protected bays and areas where fresh water comes in. And we're looking from around Point Lay and up along the Arctic coast. And so as we continue to see these temperatures averaging below normal, we'll start to see some early season ice beginning to take hold. Oh, let's look at the marine forecast, and the big weather news will be this low pressure, this strong low pressure that will produce storm force winds late in the week, Friday into Saturday, and it's going to impact especially the Panhandle, where high wind watches are in effect for Friday afternoon through Saturday morning. Start out Thursday, winds out of the south-southeast, 10 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet. The inner waterways, the outer coastal waters, generally west-southwest winds upwards to 25 knots, and waves from 7 to as high as 13, 15 feet there west of Craig and south of Sitka. But look on Friday as the low really deepens out over the south-central Gulf. We expect winds to increase from the south along coastal areas with 50 to 55 knot south to southeast winds along the outer coast, with waves building 25 to 35 feet. Inner waterways looking at southeast winds 25 knots there, Lynn Canal, but upwards to 40 knots, Ketchikan at Lakatla. And then as we go into Thursday, look along the north central Gulf Coast. Winds generally out of the northeast as a low tries to form. Initial push of energy coming across the interior southwest will pop out there just to the east-northeast of Kodiak. Winds will be 30 knots from the south-southeast, south of the Kenai. But then through Cook Inlet, look for winds picking up northeast to east, 35 knot gales, waves building 10, 11 feet. And on Friday, as that low cranks up further down toward the south-central east half of the Gulf, we are looking for winds to turn more on the north and northwest there. Cook Inlet down toward Kodiak, upwards to 25 knots, the mouth of Cook Inlet, and northeast of Kodiak with waves of 7 to 9 feet, and higher waves again the further east that you go. And then Thursday, look for the Alaska Peninsula to have winds upwards to 40 to 45 knots on the North Pacific Gulf side, strongest there south of Kodiak Island with waves building upwards to 20 feet. West winds 30 knots there, Bristol Bay 12 footers, and higher winds as you get out toward the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. I'll show you that coming up in just a moment with the eastern Aleutians. And then for Friday, widespread winds from the northwest around 25 to upwards to 35 knots. Waves generally 10 to 13 feet on the North Pacific Gulf side and 10 to 15 feet on the Bering side, especially north of Cold Bay. And here's that core of stronger storm force winds that's currently up around St. Matthew and passing south of St. Matthew. It'll end up toward Thursday morning and afternoon in the vicinity of the eastern Aleutians. Westerly winds, gales of upwards to 45 knots. Waves on the North Pacific side generally 12 to 16 feet, but on the Bering side 20 to near 25 feet there, especially north and northwest of Nikolsky. Lesser winds to 30 knots back west of Adak with waves generally running around 15 feet. And then on Friday, we are looking for winds across much of the eastern Aleutians, generally around 25 to 30 knots, waves in the 11 to 15 foot range, and lighter winds from the north-northeast 15 knots west of Adak with waves of 8 to 10 feet. Across the west coast, strongest winds on Thursday will be south of St. Paul and St. George, though we're looking at general gales around anywhere from 30 to 40 knots. And waves generally running 13 to 17 feet, though a bit less there out of Norton Sound. And then Friday, widespread north-northwest winds, generally between 25 and 35 knots, and waves continuing out over the open waters, generally between 12 and 15 feet. Along the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the north 15 to 20 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet, but along the lower Chukchi Sea, northeast winds south of Cape Lisburne and west of Kotzebue Sound, 30 knots with waves of 8 feet, 40-knot gales just north there of St. Lawrence. And then for Friday, northeast winds along the Arctic coast to 20 knots, waves running about 6 feet there, and northerly winds to 30 knots, the lower Chukchi Sea with waves of 8 to 11 feet. Here's the weather map for Thursday. Low pressure splits in two, one between the Kenai and Kodiak Island. The other piece of energy out there, it's going to move through the eastern Aleutians, and then it's going to spin up a much stronger low on Friday, and that's going to be lifting northward as we head up through the early weekend. So that's all the time I have. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.